Since the shooting on Ash Wednesday, I have found myself listening to the voices of young people. And every time I would hear on the television a young person speak out, my eyes would begin to tear up and I would start to cry. And I wondered, why is it that I'm having this reaction? And that's when I realized it's because when we listen to our young people speak, we are hearing the voices of the prophets.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
I have the honor this morning to introduce one of those prophets. Abigail Zimmerman is one of our own in the Episcopal Diocese of Texas. She is a member of St. Alban's Episcopal Church in Waco, which is about 90 miles north from here. She is, as you will tell, the product of being a part of a very socially aware family and a product of our own Episcopal Church. She is going to be a freshman at Waco High School this coming fall. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you the prophet Abigail.
On December 14th, 2012, I was 8 years old. For me, it was a perfectly normal day. It was the last day of school and the first day of Christmas break. And I was so excited for the services, presents, and family the holidays entailed. My dad went to work, my mom stayed home with me and my brothers. It seemed like an average day. Little did I realize, it was one of the most tragic days in our nation's history. The day of the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Afterwards, I learned what had happened. I understood it as best as an 8-year-old can. Families all around the country, including mine, mourned, cried, and prayed. People called for change. After 20 first graders, innocent 6- and 7-year-olds who had barely gotten a taste of all the joys in life, were brutally massacred at their elementary school. You would think people would want to protect their children and ensure that this never happened again. Amen. Yet, exactly 5 years and 2 months later, it happened again. This time in Parkland, Florida. It had happened 239 times in schools within those years, and 138 people, mostly children, had died. But this time, the survivors refused to let it continue. They found their voice. We found our voice. I found my voice. We have grown up as shooting after shooting after shooting has plagued our country, and we had had enough. Enough indifference, enough tolerance, enough fear of walking into a school but not being able to walk out. Way more than enough innocent lives lost. Enough gun violence.
Amen. Yeah.
I was one of those who cried enough. When I learned about the Parkland shooting, I was shocked. It was the largest school shooting since Sandy Hook and the 9th worst mass shooting in our country. I couldn't believe it had happened. I was horrified, angry, and sad. It was almost too much to process. I wanted to do something. I had to do something. About a week later, my friend Lily, a Presbyterian, but still cool, she saw an announcement on Instagram about school walkouts planned by Marjorie Stillman Douglas High School students. We knew it was something we had to do. We decided to walk out on March 14th for 17 minutes to honor the lives lost. We surveyed our classmates, who, although we live in the heart of Texas, and many of their parents own guns, they said they would participate. We talked it over with our school administrators, and after immense support from most of our teachers, we received their blessing. Our work began immediately. We spread the word through social media. We gathered supplies. We got our teachers to help control the crowd. I wrote a short speech for the end of the walkout. These tasks, however, turned out to be very simple compared to what I had to do next. One of my other jobs for the walkout was to make a list of the names and the ages of the victims of Parkland to read aloud, one person for each minute. Seeing how old they were really brought it home for me. When I saw how many were 14, barely a year older than I was at the time, it brought me to tears. It made me think about how easily I could be next, how my school could be next. Going into high school, this is a real concern for most of my peers. We hear stories of students getting bulletproof shields for their backpacks upon 8th grade graduation. We hear about how our government, both in Texas and in Washington, want to arm teachers. We hear these things and we worry. Some of my friends have told me about how their younger siblings are scared to start elementary school or even kindergarten because they are afraid of a school shooting. These children are 5 and 6 years old. They don't deserve to have to fear for their safety. They don't deserve active shooter drills. They should be able to go to school each day and not be afraid, to learn, to play, and make friends. Yet this is the world we live in, and it must change. At last, after many days of hard work, the day of the walkout finally came. It was one of the most nerve-wracking days of my entire life. Waiting in class until 10 o'clock was so hard. Paying attention was out of the question. By the time I arrived to my second period class at 9:20, my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. This was the class I was going to walk out of. My teacher made an announcement at the beginning of class, stating that for whom it applied, class would carry on as normal. We started our assignment. Thankfully, Lily and some other friends were there. We worked together. At 10, we walked out. Believe me, I am not the kind of student who walks out of class for any reason, especially not without permission. I was so nervous, so scared, I couldn't even look at my teacher. Thankfully, there were many other students in that classroom with more courage than me. Almost everybody followed suit. We started to walk outside and were shocked to see all kinds of kids pouring out from their classroom. When we got outside, there were students coming out from all exits. We had only promoted the walkout to about half the student body, but it seemed that everybody got the message. We expected around 100 students. All in all, around 300 showed up. It was amazing. It was amazing to see this unity and support for an issue that affects all of us. Teachers came out as well. At first I thought they were there just to control the crowd and maintain order. But then they joined us. They stood with us. We got everyone to be silent and began reading names. After I had made the list, however, they weren't just names anymore. They were human beings my age who didn't deserve to die. They were students and teachers who had their lives ahead of them with so much to accomplish. They were students like Carmen Shentra, who was going to change the world someday with her ALS research. They were so special in their own way. Many of our peers recognized this. And so we stood there, hand in hand, reflecting, praying, many people crying. At the end, we challenged every person there, student, teacher, administrator, to do 17 random acts of kindness that day to honor the memories of the people who are died. Once our time was up, we went back to class. That day, it was amazing to see the kindness being spread. Girls had written uplifting messages on the bathroom mirrors. People passed around notes with drawings and kind messages. Compliments were given with abandon. The school was filled with love that day. It was beautiful. Soon after the walkout, Lily and I were asked to speak at our local March for Our Lives, a nationwide protest against gun violence and advocating for gun control. We accepted, wrote our speech, and prepared ourselves. We got there, and it was a very different environment than the walkout. Some people there wanted a different kind of change. Upon walking into the square, we immediately noticed some counter-protesters, carrying assault rifles and shouting into the crowd. They weren't allowed into our area, but they still made their voices heard. This was one of those times where I realized I was still in Texas. Living in Texas and being a teenager, my experience in activism has been somewhat different than others. Here, there is more opposition to our movement than in other places. I have had many heated arguments and conversations with people who disagree with me. Hunting and ranching are very big in Texas, and many would argue they need extreme firearms for those activities, such as assault rifles. Therefore, people's opinions on gun control vary greatly. It is certainly a very divisive atmosphere. So, I've had to decide on my opinions and stick with them. I face plenty of backlash, which can be hard being so young, but I know that what I am doing will make a difference, and so I persevere. I am determined. I am determined to make sure that my little brothers, my children, my grandchildren, will not have to be afraid of going to school. I am determined to ensure that change comes. And now, I encourage all of you to help make change happen. Educate yourself, your friends, your family. Vote. And if you are not registered to vote, do it. Donate to organizations dedicated to promoting common sense gun control laws. Write letters to your federal, state, and local governments. Do whatever you can. Make a difference. Change must happen, and it must happen now. We are the change.
We are the change.
Let's make sure they know that. Thank you.
We are the change.